Welcome to First in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write great fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, the Hand of Adonai series, and Firsts in Fiction.
And I'm Alton Gansky, the author of Wounds, my most recent novel, and a couple of nonfiction books recently dealing with church history. Hello, Aaron.
Hello, Alton, from Fresno, California, up in the agricultural Central Valley up there. You do any farming today?
That's right. It's the heart of California. It is the breadbasket of much of the United States. And if you like anything from walnuts to what else do they grow out here? Almonds, wine. You don't grow wine, but you grow the grapes. Grapes, raisins, all of those things. That's Central California.
Interesting. Yeah. So some good stuff. You were just sharing with me that you got, what, 5,000 words knocked out today?
Yeah, I finished up my book for The Harbingers. For those who might be new, Harbingers are a series of short books, novellas, though mine kind of stretches the meaning of the word novella, with 4 different authors, Angie Hunt, Bill Myers, Frank Peretti, and me, and we're each writing from a different character's point of view. We're part of this team and supernatural suspense, and mine is book number 4, and so I just finished the writing today. I did about 5,000 words, so my brain is fried. I'm toast. Can't see anymore.
I was feeling pretty good about my 3,500 words that I wrote today. This is what happens when I have spring break. I actually have a few quiet hours in the day to focus and get some stuff written down. So I got about 3,500 words pounded out today, and that was always exciting. My new novel that I'm working on, Harrison Sawyer. So that's always fun. Yes.
3,500 is a lot. That's about the equivalent of using the standard formatting of these days, publishing formatting. That's about 10 pages. So,
yeah, it's about 3 times what I normally do, or at least 3 times my goal for a day. So I'm excited about that. Hoping to get some more done tomorrow and kind of keep the ball rolling. Keep the ball rolling there. So,
yeah.
Excellent. Do you have a publishing term for us today?
I do. It's a term we don't use much, but we see all the time. And the publishing term is a colophon, C-O-L-O-P-H-O-N, and it means, well, really it goes all the way back to the ancient Greek, and it means the finishing touch of things. And when you open a book and you look in the first pages, the front matter, there's one that will tell you about the book. So it'll tell you who the publisher was, the year it was published. That's called the colophon. It used to go in the back of the book because it was the finishing touch. It was the last thing that went into the book. So old books, you find it at the very back, but modern books, you find it up front now. So it's usually part of a half-page kind of thing, but that's where you see some of the other information. And sometimes it will include the font that's used. Not every publisher does that anymore, but they used to tell you what font they used and how special it was for reading, so that you know that you got the best font as well as the best book. Don't see that a lot anymore.
I think we just kind of take it for granted it's going to be one of, what, a handful of fonts, one of 16 different fonts that you're going to see in print these days?
Yeah, there's some that are specialized to the book industry, and we don't even see them on our computers, even though we might have 300, 400 different fonts. But you can get so close to them that it doesn't really matter. You can almost match them
Right.
with something else. And for books, most of the time it's going to be a serif font. So that'll be your second publishing term for the day. That's a letter that has little doodads on the ends. So the capital T, for example, has projections coming off the T bar at the top and at the base, as opposed to sans serif, which means no serifs. And those are things like Arial, Helvetica, those kinds of things. And most of us have been taught to read serif fonts, and so it's a little easier for us to read that. Though there's now almost a trend away from that, which I think is a mistake. But
so the Times New Roman, that would be a serif font.
Times New Roman would be serif font. Garamond is serif font. What's it called? A school book, I think it is. Our Bookman, those are all serif fonts. So if they have little doodads on the ends of the letters to make them look slightly fancy, that's a serif font, and that's what we're used to reading. you're looking at your lower third or my lower third, that's a sans serif font because they don't have any protrusions, extensions, or anything on the letters. So that's where we are on that.
Well, let's kind of continue on this little rabbit hole here. We're off on a tangent here. That happens sometimes. If you are submitting your work to a publisher, is there a particular font they would like to see? This is I'm setting you up here. I already know the answer, but I'd just like to make you look more intelligent.
You always say that like you have the answer, but you know.
It's a good cover story.
Yeah. It's ideally today, especially if you're first starting out, I always teach my students to follow a certain format. Now, we live in a day when they can change all of that stuff in just a few minutes, but we go back to the time when you couldn't do that on your computer, and you want to use today Times New Roman. You're always safe with Times New Roman. No one's going to criticize you for using Times New Roman. Nice serif font, and then you want your manuscript to have 1-inch borders, 1-inch margins around it, and double space the text. Use italics for internal dialogue. Don't have to underline them anymore like you used to when you're doing typewriters. That's where underlining a word for italics came in. It's because you couldn't type in italics, so you would underline it. Then IBM put out the Selectric, which allowed you to do that, electric typewriter. And so that went by the wayside. So basically, yeah, you want to use Times New Roman. Every once in a while, somebody will come up and they'll say, no, it's got to be Courier. That's not true. The only place that applies, and it doesn't even apply there much anymore, but is if you're writing screenplays. And the only reason is you use Courier 12-point in a screenplay because when they're reviewing the screenplay, every page represents 1 minute of screen time. Now, when they're done with it, it doesn't always work out that way, but when they're looking at it, the first thing they're going to do is look, how many pages do I have here? Do I have a comedy that's 90, should be 90 pages if I have a comedy? You know, if it's a horror movie, action movie, whatever it might be, then I'm looking for 120. Then if you're doing an epic kind of thing, then you might be looking at 200 pages. And so they'll judge the length of the story based on that. So there are many production companies, people who acquire for film production, want it in Courier, especially from people they don't know.
And when in doubt, the best thing to do is just to check. Check the submission guidelines for online journals that you're submitting to, or to print journals that you're submitting to publishers that you're submitting to. The information is not hard to find these days, but you'd be surprised how many writers do not check those types of things. We still get submissions at the Citron Review that are listed as microfiction that, according to our submission guidelines, need to be 100 words or less. I've had people send me 60-page manuscripts, and I, for the life of me, cannot figure out why, because nowhere on our site does it say anything about 60-page manuscripts. Yeah, please make sure that you're reading those submission guidelines, and if you can't find them, then Times New Roman is going to be your safest bet.
It is possible that they might have something that they prefer, but in general, you're not going to go wrong with the Times New Roman. And you're right. We even for the writers' conference I lead, we get submissions for the contest, and we have very specific requirements for it, and we list it and give them a checklist, and sure enough, they'll break that, or they'll do things like, here this is, I'll let you edit it. Well, that's not going to happen. You're the writer, you do the editing for it, so it is good to go do that, because to review the guidelines, because what the editors see when you don't look at them is someone who either doesn't pay attention, isn't smart enough to check, or is going to be difficult to work with. And so they're looking for reasons to reject your work because they have so many other stories, other books, works to look at, whatever it is that you're working on. They have so many others to look at. They're looking for a reason to reject you. So, you can give them that. You can say, well, my stuff is so good that I don't have to pay attention to this. And what they see is someone's going to be very difficult to work with. It's going to be a tough marriage.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to be incredibly good to pull anything like that off, or have a reputation. Cormac McCarthy doesn't use quotation marks, and nobody tells him to anymore. Toni Morrison has written some stuff that I don't even know, I can't even understand some of it, but she's got a Pulitzer Prize. It's kind of hard to tell her, or I'm sorry, a Nobel Prize. It's kind of hard to tell her, no. So
Yeah, Stephen King encountered that when he wrote The Stand. It was just too long, and so he had to cut it way, way down. It was a horrible amount of cutting he had to do. And then King became Stephen King, and he published the full length on his own. And no one tells him now just how long. They'll say, "Can you shoot for this?" But once you're well established, then you can start breaking the rules. But if you're trying to break in, don't break the rules up front, or it'll come back and bite you.
yeah, when you have the reputation, you have a little more leeway.
Right.
Yeah. Those of you who are noticing my eyes dart down often, I'm on my phone. We've got a guest that's going to be joining us tonight if we can work out the technology behind the scenes here. Her name is Syd Blue. She is a pilot. She's written some YA books about female pilots and things of that nature. Some really cool stuff. But we're trying to work out the technology right now to see if we can bring her on to talk about how she's used her personal experience as a pilot in her fiction, and how that kind of helps serve the fiction, and has given her a platform even for marketing. And that is our topic for tonight, which is using your personal experience in your fiction, and really mining your life for some of the gems and the details that are really going to kind of help make your fiction come alive and pop and be a little more, kind of add that feel of realism to it. So while I'm working with her, Pops, I don't know if you want to maybe talk a little bit about this, but I notice in your novels, a lot of them take place in San Diego. Of course, you've lived in San Diego, or you did live in San Diego for a number of years. So I didn't know if you could maybe talk a little bit about that. What kinds of things inspired you to use San Diego as a setting, and what do you think it added to your books?
Sure, I can talk about that for a bit. There's an old saying that you write what you know. I prefer to write what I don't know, but I like to set it in places where I know what's going on. So if I'm going to use a real place, I have a tendency to use places where I've lived. So my earlier books took place in San Diego because at the time I was writing them, I lived in San Diego. I grew up there, so I knew which way the freeways ran. I knew the cross streets. I knew the weather. I knew where all the tourist traps were. I just knew all those things because I'd spent a lot of years down there. And so it was natural for me to do that, but even in that, I would sometimes make things up. And just so people couldn't pin me down on it. And so that makes things a lot easier in your writing because you're not having to figure things out. Now, I've written a lot of books where things take place in everything from the eastern Siberia. I've never been to eastern Siberia. And I've never been across the Sea of Japan at night in gigantic swells and those sorts of things. So I have to do a lot of research, make notes, and stuff. So it is easier, if you can, to draw from your own experience, that is where you lived. San Diego, for example, has traffic problems at certain times of day. And so if I've got something going on at 5 o'clock and they're going to hit the freeway, they're not going to be moving very fast. So I have to be able to factor that in, or people in San Diego are going to call me on it. And so I've done that. I've also set, in other towns I've lived in, such as Ojai, I set a scene there. So I've set them in different places. And so I've used part of my experience from where I've lived, applied it to the book, and it's made it easier for me, but it also makes it a little more realistic because I just know what the lighting is like and the feel of the place.
Yeah, it's easy to to remember that, to be inspired by that. It's nice to kind of have that in your back pocket, and it's also nice for readers who live in San Diego to be able to pick up the book and recognize landmarks that they've been there, and understand that they're on the freeway at 5 o'clock. There's going to be traffic. Incidentally, Los Angeles also has traffic at certain times of day, usually from 12:01 a.m. to about 11:59 p.m. Is usually when we hit the traffic there. So we do have jumping in right now, Syd Blue, I think. So Syd, are you there? We'll kind of give her a minute. Looks like she joined, but maybe having a little bit of audio-visual trouble here. So the bargain for me was also another one that I did. The setting was there. Um, it's a town I drive through every day. I did a lot of research on it as well. But I've been there, and like you say, you know the particular slant of light, you know the particular what the weather feels like, because weather feels different in the desert than it does in San Diego. You don't have that, marine layer coming in to keep things kind of cool in the summer. I like to tell this story about San Diego. I went there once for a conference. It was a 5-day conference. I checked the weather for the conference for all 5 days, and the low was 68 and the high was 72 for all 5 days, and it was accurate. It was unbelievable. 4 degrees, fluctuation for 5 days. That's a pretty amazing place. Whereas in the desert, you're going to go from freezing temperatures at night to the 50s or 60s during the day, sometimes more. You can get a huge variation in temperatures throughout the day, where you don't necessarily see that in some place like San Diego. So.
And I've used real places, but then changed their name, so I can make alterations to it. So I drew on personal experience in doing that. I did a series of mysteries that took place in Ridgeline, and Ridgeline is a mountain community, but it's based on Arrowhead in the San Bernardino Mountains of Southern California, and Wrightwood, another smaller community a little further away, and I drew from both of those to make a single town. And then the Matty Glenn stories that I did take place in what is really Ventura, Buenaventura. Everyone just calls it Ventura, on the coast in California. But I used many of the street names, the street directions. I used all of those things because I knew them. I lived close to Ventura at the time. I was living in Ojai, so it was easy for me to run down and drive through the town. But I just changed the name so I could make other changes that I wanted. If I wanted to add a restaurant that wasn't there, if I wanted to change the color of the police cars, I could do those things. So I'm still using personal experience to lay out the plateau, not the plateau. I just lost the word. It'll come to me a little bit later.
Foundation?
But the foundation would be work, yeah, to set up the canvas that I was going to paint on. But then I can make some of those changes. And then Molly makes an interesting comment here. She likes to use Google Earth. And I like to use that too, especially the feature where you can get down on the street as a little green man and you put it on the street and you can spin around and you can see everything. And I use that a lot in my book Wounds because it takes place in different spots in San Diego. And so for each place where a body was found, each place where some action takes place that's outside, I would use Google Earth. I would get down to street level on Google Earth. And I would spin the guy around so I got a 360-degree view of what was going on with that area, and then I drew my descriptions right off of that and put those in. So I had the experience of San Diego, but now I'm using the internet to be able to make even better descriptions because I could go to specific streets without having to, in that case, leave Fresno.
Yeah, absolutely, which is always nice. But, research is always good. It's a good excuse to go down to San Diego and visit for a while. So,
And write it off.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. So settings, very valuable when you're writing, pulling from your own personal experience here to be able to use those settings, and especially if you're well-traveled, if you've lived in a variety of different places. I was just a kid when we were there in San Diego. Oh, wait, we got Syd here?
Oops.
Okay, so we've got your audio. Hey, there's your video. Hi, Syd, how are you?
Good, how are you doing?
Good. So, all right. Like to introduce our listeners to Syd Blue here. Pops, this is Syd Blue. She's a writer. She's written 2 books, both YA. One is Fly Girl and the other is Circle. And both have to do a lot with flying. And Syd, you are a pilot, correct?
Yes, commercial pilot.
Excellent. So we've started our conversation here. We've already talked about how we can use settings from our own life to kind of make our fiction come alive a little bit. Your books, do they take place in cities where you grew up that you were familiar with, or did you kind of fictionalize the towns, or how did you handle that?
Absolutely. Both Fly Girl and Circle are from the areas around me. So Fly Girl is set in Big Bear Lake and our airport here because it's about a 16-year-old girl who learns to fly an airplane the hard way. And Circle is set in through Edwards Air Force Base and Mojave Desert and the mines and special features, the Rainbow Basin. And it's an adventure that is carried out through the whole Southern California area because I fly through those areas, and when I'm flying I look down and I get these ideas for stories. So especially through Edwards Air Force Base, I see experimental airplanes. They fly over my head as I'm going through doing aerial surveillance. So Circle is kind of unique in that it's at Edwards Air Force Base for part of the time.
Yeah, we're actually not too far from Edwards Air Force Base, and I've actually been out there once as a kid, way back in the day. So that desert area is where I'm from, and very familiar with that, the Mojave Desert, and been up to Big Bear a couple times as well. So very, very nice place. But I like that you're able to pull some of those experiences. It seems like in the air you're just going to have all sorts of stories coming to you. I tend to think of things as I drive, which I guess is not really the same thing, but
it is. Yeah. It is. You just get your mind going, and if you can use the local area, that's one thing that the kids love about it. Both Fly Girl and Circle are being read in middle schools, and so the kids up here in Big Bear Lake love that they know those places that I refer to in the book. So especially the airports too. They don't have a lot of experience with flying or airports, and I kind of bring it down to the layman's understanding of how to actually fly an airplane, so they love that too.
And that's a really good point, though. I like that your profession, you're pulling from your profession to kind of add that layer of realism to your stories as well. Pops, you served as a minister for a number of years, and your character in your first couple of books was also a minister. I don't know if you want to talk about that, but real quick, so do you have headphones by chance?
Does that help? Yes, I can get some.
Yeah, okay. Sid, we're getting the feedback through. We're hearing our voices through your microphone. Yeah, while she's doing that, yeah, we're still getting that. So.
Sorry.
Oh, it's fine.
Let me untangle them. All right. How's that?
Oh, that's much better.
Okay.
That's much better. Yeah.
Yeah, for those watching or watching later, what happens is, since we're on internet, when we speak, it sometimes comes out the speakers of someone else's computer, and if it's not turned down real low, the microphone will pick it up and run it back, and then it runs it back into our ears, and it runs it back again to the other person, and then that's why we wear these little earphones and stuff. That's really the only way to keep it down. And then with Hangouts, you have to be careful about talking over because it creates a latency problem. Anyway, yeah, so I was a pastor for 22 years, or as I like to think of it, I probably kept 3 churches from having a pastor during those years. Mm-hmm. And so it was natural for me for my first book to have one of the characters be a minister because I knew all the things that they think, what they do, that sort of thing. So that was drawing on that experience. But I could also talk about the funny things that have happened and then the deeply sad and moving things that happen, the things that move you to tears. And I was able to draw on those things and put them in the books. And in fact, I enjoyed that character so much that in Wounds I brought him back as a minor character. So my protagonist in my first book is a minor character in my last novel, just because I wanted to see him again. So I gave him a small role, and I beat him up in the last book, so he won't take anything more than a walk-on part. So.
Is that what he does? He just walks on the scene and orders ice cream, and then it's just kind of a cameo, or?
No, he comes in and he gives a little advice. He provides a little support, and then then we go back to the real protagonist who teaches it at seminary. So once again, in my last book, I went back to things that I understood, because I taught at the college level some, and so I went back to that and drew on those things. Now, you don't always have to do that, and I think it's one thing we want to make clear. You don't have to make all your stories about what you do, but if you have something that's interesting, it's larger than life, it's a good place to start, and it does make it a little bit easier and more realistic. But I have also written military stuff, and I've not been in the military, and so I had quite a learning curve on that to master how the characters spoke to each other, spoke to superiors, and so on. So, you can learn a lot of this.
Yeah, absolutely. The bargain is, I've got a journalist, and I've not served as a journalist. I've never worked as a journalist. I've never really written for newspapers or anything of the like. But at his heart, he's still a writer, and so there was that kind of an element there. In the Hand of Adonai series, it's a YA fiction, and while I'm not writing about teachers, I am writing about kids, and I do, as a high school teacher, I do see kids, on a daily basis, and I see how they interact, and they're able to kind of keep me straight on what the hip lingo is these days. But spoiler alert, hip lingo is not hip lingo these days.
Right.
So, to kind of keep me grounded. So even though I'm not writing about those who are in the same professional field as me, I'm writing about the interactions that I have with those kids. And so as a pastor, you worked with people, and you saw people in a variety of different roles and capacities, and you could write about them. And Syd, as a pilot, you're working with a whole host of other professionals in your field and around your field, and I'm sure you're able to draw on those experiences as well to kind of flesh out your fiction a little bit more.
Yes, actually, I grew up on military bases, so I have a lot of experience with that, but I fly through military bases as well, Nellis Air Force Base, Camp Pendleton. That's an actual live war zone. It's a practice war zone where they have live fire. So I actually come home some days feeling like I've been to war because you see the mortar fires all around, and you have a very narrow area that you can fly to be safe and avoid that. In fact, Fly Girl has a lot of stories from my flying experience or other pilots. I fly, as a commercial pilot, you don't have a choice often to fly. If the weather's marginal, it's still legal and safe, but other pilots wouldn't fly on that day because there's severe turbulence or something. But it's your job, so you go. And you get yourself into all sorts of situations in the sky because it's such a dynamic environment, and it's always changing, and you never know what it's going to be like. It's never as forecast often. Sometimes you're just surprised by what you find up there, and you just have to deal with it. And so there was this one scene that's in Fly Girl where her plane is like a ping pong ball in the sky. It's like exceeding the critical angle of attack, and it's stalling out, and the stall alarm's blaring, and then it's dipping down, and that comes from an experience that I had where I was surprised by unforecasted severe turbulence flying through the Banning Pass, which is already really turbulent. And all you can do is just react gently, because you don't want to take the wings off if you're exceeding the force of centrifugal force that it can stand, and the performance of the airplane. So you just react, and you get through. You say your prayers, and you make it through. Another story in the book is, have you ever seen a porpoised plane? I think you have, Aaron, because you saw the.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just the one that you showed at the Writers Club.
Yes. Well, I saw a student who had done that. When they come in at the wrong angle and the wrong speed, they can break the nose gear off. And so there's this poor little plane on display at one of the airports I fly into, and you just see the result of getting into a porpoise diving up and down when you're trying to land and not correcting it properly to get out of that situation. So those are kind of like the exciting stories and unwanted adventure that Fly Girl encounters when she's impatient going after her dream. She kind of takes shortcuts and forgets a few things and finds herself in situations where the only way out is through.
Yeah. You know, this kind of brings up a good point, though. And one thing that I was thinking of, we've got writers like Michael Crichton and John Grisham and Robin Cook, who are all, you know, professionals in their particular lines of work, be it medical field or law. James Scott Bell, also a lawyer and very gifted writer. And so you think about these people that have made a name for themselves as writers, but also as lawyers or doctors, etc. And one of the questions I think that comes up is, why choose to write fiction? Why fictionalize some of these events that have, or why pull from our life into fiction? Why not simply write, say, a memoir or you know, an autobiography? So I'll kind of handle that question real quick, and then if you guys want to jump in. But the reason I don't write memoirs and autobiographies is because my life is pretty boring. Which is good. I mean, I'm grateful. I mean, I have very little conflict in my life. I mean, you're talking about porpoising planes, and it's like, yeah, I had a flat tire once, so you know, that was
scary.
Yeah, it was nerve-wracking. You know, I had to pull over and then wait for somebody to come and change it for me. So, but it was, you know, for me, there are elements of my life I think that are interesting, but aren't interesting, I guess, enough. At least speaking for personal experience. In the bargain, I do have a little, there's a house that's been spray painted that says Satin Rules, which came from, you know, a personal experience. Somebody had spray painted Satin Rules on our church, which I thought was fantastically funny. And so that kind of made its way into the bargain, but you know, I'm not exactly going to be writing a memoir about that particular event. So
yeah, in case you're missing it, the guy tagging it, the spray painting the church, apparently didn't know how to spell Satan. He wanted to say Satan Rules, instead he said Satin Rules. And
that's funny.
Had a good laugh about that for a long time.
Right.
It could have been a fashionista, you know, we don't know. You know, maybe it was the fashion police or something. So, Pops, why do you choose fiction as opposed to, well, you've done nonfiction as well. But you started with fiction and you continue to write fiction years and years later. So what is it about fiction that attracts you to write more?
Well, writing is really the goal. Nonfiction I enjoy very much, and it gets to empty a different part of my brain. Where fiction, which has been my primary writing, most of my books are novels, just touches a certain aspect. It's the thing about fiction writing is that it's experiential. I can get involved in some things in writing nonfiction. I'm doing research on William Jennings Bryant, and I'm thinking of opening with his funeral, and you know, that's kind of moving. But in fiction, I can write myself into tears, or I can make myself laugh, because as a writer, I do the same thing as a reader, and you can't distinguish between reality and fiction when you're in those kinds of moments, and so it allows me to empty that part of my brain, as well as do the fun stuff, such as, you know, constructing story, making sure the plot holds together. But the one thing that fiction does better than nonfiction, and I'm not saying nonfiction can't do this, it certainly does, is bring out the emotion. Now, Peter Wynne wrote Day One, which had to do with the development of the atomic bombs and dropping them on Japan, but he did something that others weren't doing. He showed what it was like to be on the ground in Japan during that thing, and what he writes is so moving that I have remembered it since I read it a few decades ago, and have never read it again, because he brought up so much emotion. So you can do that in nonfiction, but that is the stock and trade of fiction, to be able to you know, use some facts, some description, but you're really getting into the minds and the hearts of people and letting your readers do the same.
And now, Sid, I did want to kind of, I toss this question to you, but I want to put a little bit of a spin on it because one of the interesting things about your books is the accuracy with which you write, and STEM has kind of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics has kind of championed these books and getting young kids interested in the sciences, etc. So you've got these really accurate books, but you're also telling a story. So I'm curious how you walk that line between writing a training manual and still telling a good story. How did you walk that line?
Lots of revision. Well, that's the thing about fiction is you can condense it to make it more interesting. And in Fly Girl, there's a lot of stories and a lot of things that happen to her in flight adventures in a short period of time, which when in actuality those stories happen to different people at different times. So it was the condensation that made it more interesting. And then in Circle, because it's kind of a cross between E.T. and Indiana Jones, it's an adventure, and I have the excitement of the chase for the story for the kids, so they notice that, and that's what they get into. And then while they're going along in this adventure, they're introduced to concepts in science. Because Circle is about a boy who finds an extraterrestrial girl hiding out and living in his house, and then he finds out that she's there because they crashed there, and the pilot was taken to Edwards Air Force Base, and she has to get Spencer, the 14-year-old boy, to help her rescue the pilot from Edwards Air Force Base so they can get home with the one thing they need for their civilization to survive. But as they're on the run from drones and attack helicopters and fighter jets, he and his family find out what the extraterrestrial girl and the pilot are really on Earth for, and then they don't know if they can help them get home. So that plot is what draws in the kids, and then as they're going along, they can learn about astronomy and genetic engineering and all sorts of consumption, conservation, just aspects of our planet, and the whole hope for the book is that it just gets them aware and thinking about what we are doing on our planet and what we're doing to preserve the planet. And that's kind of seen through the eyes of someone who's just coming here, and it's a totally different experience for her. Everything's new and amazing, and so it's kind of fun to see through someone else's eyes just all the amazing things that we do have here, and sharing that.
I agree with that, and I like what you're saying about seeing these pretty commonplace things through somebody else's perspective, and fiction has a way of making the ordinary into the extraordinary, and it's a way of taking parts of our life that may not be super exciting, but making them exciting to a different character. That perception, I think, is very valuable in fiction for us to explore, kind of exploratory writing, I guess. I know a lot of people do that to kind of sort out their feelings and to try and force themselves to see things from a different perspective. And that's one of the interesting things about fiction and pulling elements from your life into your fiction, is you get to shine a different light on it. And that's one of the things that I would encourage our writers to do, is if you're going to include things from your own life, try not to do what's expected. Try not to have the ordinary, but instead try and examine it from a different angle, shine a different light on it, so that these experiences in some way can transcend their ordinary, mundane kind of feel and become something extraordinary and memorable and impactful. So, yes. Yeah. I do want to ask about, and this is kind of a tricky question, so I'm going to start with you, Pops, using people that you know in real life as characters in your book. How do you feel about that? Is that something that you've done? Can you not say because of legal reasons, or how does that work for you?
Well, since my third restraining order, no, I never do that, and for that reason, I have been accused of it. I remember somebody coming up saying, "I know who you based every character on," and I'm thinking, I didn't base them on anyone. I have occasionally based the looks of a character on someone, but it isn't necessarily someone I know. It's just somebody I thought I had an interesting face or something interesting about them, and then I factored that in. I try never to take people I know and put them into my books. I think it's unfair to them, and I think it lacks imagination on my part. So there's always a danger of offending someone. If somebody thinks that's them and you're close enough to them, then you could encounter a problem if they want to get all legal about it and go after you. So I try to stay away from that. However, we are dealing with humans, and humans have a lot of things in common. So no matter who you write about, someone's going to think you're writing about them, or their husband, or their wife, or somebody. It really doesn't matter. But I try to stay away from that. I try not even to use the same names unless they're very common names.
Well, I would disagree because I think that there's so many interesting people, and borrowing from them has really created a rich environment. For example, the story about a girl becoming popular in high school because she's learning how to fly was actually taken from a pilot that I know. I guess in that case it's not a negative trait, but just a really interesting story from her life that when she started to learning to fly, like everybody at school was just in awe of her, and she kind of became a celebrity at high school. So I thought that was an interesting idea to play with.
But is your character that person, or they just have a common experience?
Well, in that instance, it is a common experience. But in another instance where Old Vern in the book of Fly Girl was based on my first flight instructor, and he was 90 years old, and we'd go up to go on a flight lesson, and we'd get up in the air, and I would see that he was asleep. So I was actually afraid that it was a beginning flight lesson. I didn't know how to land the plane. What happened if he conked out or something? And the plane was even older, and so I was terrified of going on these first flight lessons because I would just see my instructor passed out right next to me. So I did actually use that story. I don't know, is that a negative story?
Well, I don't know. Is he still alive?
Yes.
Wow.
But yeah, I don't think I've ever told him, so I don't think he's found out that he was a character in my book.
Yeah, like you say, Pops, there are some legal questions to have with that, and that's one reason why I haven't really based a character on somebody that I know. Now, I have used names of students a lot of times. They'll be like, put me in your book. I want to be in your book. And so I've used a student name here and there, or a combination of student names and things of that nature. They think it's great. I don't do anything that's going to be in any way offensive to those characters, but I'll pull some commonalities, some characteristics of people I know, but rarely do I model a character basically like a one-for-one model. I've never tried to use all of the characteristics of a particular acquaintance in my own book as a character, because I feel like there is I feel like that would be too close. I think I kind of side with you on that one, Pops. On just there's a particular line of comfort that I like to have, a particular professional distance I think that I like to establish. But like Syd, like you say, borrowing characteristics of people is fine. I think that story about the flight instructor who falls asleep is just gold. Like, I don't know how you would not use that in your book. So it sounded fantastic. Yeah, but you change the name and some other characteristics, physical descriptions maybe, but
no, he was wearing the same outfit every day, so I had to get that in the book. It was so cute.
See, but then what you could do is you could use that for like several different characters. You've got the one character who always wears the same thing, and then you got the other character who falls asleep at the pilot stick.
Right.
That's the technical term, right? The pilot stick.
Control column, yoke.
Sure, those sound better. We'll go with those. Right on. Excellent. Well, what about, let's see, what else do we have here? We've talked about professions and settings and characters, and Anything else that you guys use from life experiences that you like to add into your fiction?
Many writers will draw on the difficult things in their lives, and they may not just relate the actual event. Writers tend to be a weird group, especially professional writers, working writers that make their living at it, or trying to make a living at it, that even when they go through the worst possible thing, they have to go to the hospital with somebody, or something happens to a dear friend or a family member, they will later admit that while they're going through that, they're noticing things that they can use in a book. And I think it's a reflex action. They don't go there and go, oh, goody, this will be a great experience for me to get some details about what goes on in an ICU as my husband is being wheeled in there. It's not that, but their mind just is used to filing this stuff away, so even when they go through that. But if you can capture the emotion, if you can remember the emotion, you can apply that to your own writing. And remember what emotion is. It's really a compound word, emotion. It's movement inside is literally what it means. And so there's always something physical to describe. Well, how did it affect you? And if you can get that, and then you can use that same kind of emotion for any number of situations. But you can draw from the bad as well as the good.
I would agree with that. Absolutely. And that's another thing that writers can do to displace, is especially if it's a particularly, traumatizing event, that displacement of putting themselves outside of the situation long enough to examine it from that different light, that different angle, kind of like we talked about, is something that writers can do.
And then if you can find the most cathartic emotion to work through in the writing, actors love it when they can really dig their teeth into a juicy role like that. So it can be cathartic to move through those emotions too and deal with different experiences in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. There was one question that I had before we jump over and start taking questions from the room. And this is kind of a personal thing. So how do you guys, writers like to write about writers. We talk about using life experiences, and we write. And so it seems that most, well, maybe not most, but a lot of beginning writers like to write about writers. My first novel, which was not published, was about a writer. Surprise, surprise. Do you guys have any particular thoughts on that? Is that something that you think is okay? Is that something that you shy away from? How do you weigh in on the writer on writer writing?
I was just going to say that, yeah, I think that if you can find something that is really interesting to a large audience, then you're going to have more people interested in reading about that. But I think also we like to learn when we read, so that's why Michael Crichton and John Grisham and all the professionals who put so much information from their expertise and their profession into the books. It's fascinating. It's so interesting. So keeping that varied and exploring different professions is only going to add. I think that we have had a lot of writers as the protagonist, so just shake it up a little bit, I think.
How about you, Pops?
I don't think I've ever had a writer as a protagonist that I can think of anyway. One reason that's used a lot is some do it for the fun because it's almost a genre in itself where the protagonist is a writer. The other thing is writers tend to have a freedom to move about, and so that makes it easier for the writer to do that as opposed to somebody that has a blue-collar job and has to spend a certain number of hours at work, and they can't just get up and leave in any realistic situation. So sometimes I think they default to that for that reason. But also writers are interesting to most people, so some people like to see the behind-the-scenes thing going on with the writers. Mm-hmm. I've not done it. Now, a couple of times Michael Crichton's been mentioned for writing what he knows. He certainly did that when he was at Harvard Med and writing A Dramatist Strain, and so he had several things that he wrote that came from his medical training, but he went way beyond that, including Airframe. fact, he has a great scene in there about a commercial airliner porpoising.
Right.
And he does it from inside and shows what that's like, and it was just positively terrifying. Well, he's not an aerospace engineer, but he knew how to get the information.
Right, that's true.
Yeah, so he did that really with a great many things. Global warming, he had his anti-global warming book. Regardless of how you feel about that, nonetheless, he went with that. Well, he wasn't an expert in global warming, but he learned everything he needed to learn. Same thing with, okay, you guys are going to help me out here. The one where they go back in timeline, where they go back to medieval Europe, days and nights and stuff like, yeah. And so obviously he didn't live during that time. So you can learn this stuff, but you can also learn from your own experiences how to put that emotion in, what was felt, that sort of thing. But then you can learn the milieu was the word I was looking for last time I was talking about this. You can learn all of that and make it believable in a book.
Right. Good point.
Absolutely. One of my favorite films is Stranger Than Fiction, which is about a writer. So very metafiction. Yeah, very metafiction to do that. But you know, it's been done well, and then it's been done poorly. I guess it's just like anything else. There have been books written about lawyers that have been terrible, and then you get John Grisham, who writes some great lawyer fiction. So
that's true.
Yeah, I mean, it really kind of goes back to how much research you do and how authentic it is, and how good the writing is. So.
Well, I think you guys make a good point about emotion too, because I think that people in entertainment, they want to feel it. As we go through our lives, sometimes it can get a little boring or mundane. So bringing that emotional arc into it is just so important, and having an emotional punch. So I'm glad you guys are talking a lot about emotion.
Yeah, absolutely. Molly's got a couple questions before we wrap up here. So she says, do you read through old journals to find material for your fiction? I assume journals like diaries and things of that nature. She says, or am I the only one, and should I admit this? No, you shouldn't, and yes, you are. I don't remember the last time I kept a journal. It must have been in high school or just out of high school, and I do my best not to remember that time in my life, so we just like to pretend it never happened. So I don't do that. I don't know. How about you, Syd?
I don't. I do have journals, but I don't know what they're there for. I think that the actual act of just writing a journal is the benefit, because you can get so many ideas and work things out. And I've even written about characters. I have a ton of journals, but I don't really go back to them. I think once you write it down, it kind of organizes it, but you still remember it. And so I think that's a great method. If she wants to do that, it can really help her get to the core of characters and stories and themes. It's awesome.
How about you, Pops?
No, I don't journal. I was forced to do it in high school. I hated it then, and I've fortunately been able to maintain that hatred through the decades. No, I'm not that transparent even to myself. So I don't journal at all. If that's what she's talking about, other people's journals or journals she kept. My ideas usually come from anything from reading something in a news piece. I started saying newspaper, but I can't remember the last time I picked up a real newspaper. But through the news, one way or the other, or some kind of online magazine, or just ideas that pop into my head from things. So I haven't needed that for me and for the kind of stuff that I write.
I would definitely advocate reading other people's journals for material. I think that's a great idea. It might get you into a little bit of trouble. You might lose a couple friends, but you can always put them into your book as revenge. So, but now that we're mentioning it, I mean, if I had been journaling for years and years and years, I'm sure I would have been able to find some good story ideas in there. I have journaled story ideas when I've come up with those things, but it's all for my fiction. It hasn't really been stuff for my life. And then Molly Jo also wants to know, and I think this is our last question here, she wants to know, Syd, what was the first story that you ever wrote, and what was it based on?
Well, I started writing when I was 9, so it was about these kids who went on a field trip and got stuck in a museum, and then a mummy was chasing them all through the night. And this was before all the mummy movies, so I don't know where that idea came from. But for Circle, I was working in the tech industry as an editor, and I had just found out that Earth has gotten brighter. Because when you pave over dirt, concrete reflects more light than dirt. And so I was thinking, well, that's interesting. We could have just shown up in someone else's telescope. So maybe someone was out there looking at the night sky and just saw Earth pop up. And then I started thinking about pen pals, these kids from other worlds talking to each other, someone from another world talking to someone on Earth, and what they would talk about. And from that grew the idea. I mean, that's not in the book circle, but that's where the idea was born out of. So I think there's all sorts of methods, and if going back to the journaling thing, if that works, that's great.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, we are pretty much out of time here, so before we sign off, Syd, why don't you just go ahead and mention your books one more time, and then also how our listeners can get in touch with you.
All right. Well, both. You can get in touch with me from sydblue.com. So that's Syd like Sydney, Australia, SYD, and then blue like the color, sydblue.com. And there's a link there, too, for the books. You can read about them, or you can read about how to learn to fly, or how to get a free ride in an airplane. There's all sorts of resources. My bio, and then also STEM. There's some information about STEM on my website as well. So.
Excellent. All right, and Pops, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, altongansky.com is still the place to go to kind of catch up on everything. It's a good portal to the Writers' Conference and to the Harbingers series of books that we're doing, and just about everything else. So that's really probably the go-to place. And then from there, of course, you can follow me on the Twitternator and the Facebooker and stuff like that if you'd like.
Tweety bird. And as always, you can get a hold of me at aarongansky.com. You can find me on Facebook and the Twitter. And yeah, drop us a line. I'd love to hear from you. Follow us on YouTube and subscribe on iTunes and all that good stuff. So until next week, thank you all for listening, and good writing.